All right. Well, thank you for waiting. We're a little bit late today, but this is Human Design Catalyst for the week of October 23rd, 2023, and I guess difficulty at the beginning is in the transits. Yeah. So, but I have a fun topic that I want to talk about, and that's a topic that has been coming up a lot lately. I think it's been spurred on by Jovian Archives emails. They've been for the last couple of weeks, they've been emailing out excerpts of Ra's Projector Empowerment lectures, which are really great lectures. And in them, he talks quite a bit about really the role of the projector in the coming time. So the topic today will be projector ascendency and the role of the projector after 2027. Mm-hmm. Because we are in this interregnum where we have not yet seen what projectors fully are here to do. We're catching glimpses of it, but it's almost as if the projectors are kind of babies. Like we have baby Mike, baby Ashley, and they're still kind of stretching and getting comfortable in their own skin of what their role is in this coming time. So that's the topic, and I would love to open up the floor at some point, but I do have a couple of quotes to read and my own comments and thoughts. So just first of all, let's see, I know Shango is a projector, and then Nicola, you're a projector, and then Sandra is a projector, right? And then here we have Ashley over my shoulder, and then we have Mike. So maybe we'll be leaning on our projectors today to offer their own opinions and ideas and kind of how can we imagine the role of the projector in this coming time. And this is also relevant to the conversation I had with Doc earlier. Doc is a projector and he's left variable. And then my good friend and his partner Rachel is quad right, and she's a manifesting generator. And it might seem that they have very different designs, but the quad right and the projector have something in common, regardless of even if you're a quad left projector, as is the case with Mike. And welcome. Shri is also a projector. Yeah. So thanks for joining. We now have a penta here. So the topic today is the role of the projector after 2027. And I was saying how I have a good friend, Rachel, who's a quad right manifesting generator, and she's in a relationship with a very left variable projector. Well, his sun earths are left variable and then nodes are right variable. Doc, yeah, but he's splenic. So he's a splenic projector. And Mike is a quad left projector. And it might seem that the projector has nothing to do with right variable, but they actually have a commonality, which is that they are both what is needed for this new era. They're both what is needed. I mean, the topic is basically projector ascendency. How can the projector rise to the top, which is its natural place in the hierarchy, to help guide us after 2027? So Ra actually uses a kind of funny image for the totality. He said it's not, he liked to say that the center is not the middle, and this is one of those riddles. The center is not right in the middle. No, the center of mutation, the center of progress is on the fringes. And so the image that he would use for the totality is actually a single spermatozoa, kind of the almost the Gnostic symbolism of panspermia, right? The single spermatozoa with a long tail. And the center of mutation is actually right at the front, right at the tip of the spear, right at the head of this totality. And the long tail is what we've left behind us in our evolutionary past. The seven-centered being, and before them, the five-centered being, the Neanderthal. And the way Ra put it was that in this new paradigm, it's all hierarchies, and every type of projector has to be at the head of their own hierarchy, with the ultimate being the mental projector, who is at the head of, it's like the head of the council of projectors, if I could put it that way, or the head of the hierarchies. But that the emotional projectors are going to be the heads of their respective hierarchies, and the splenic projectors, the heads of theirs, that each projector has work to do in a particular hierarchy. And what is that work? What is it that the projector gives the other? They're not giving the other generating. They're not giving the other manifesting. They're not giving the other what they can get from the other types. They're not giving the sampling of the reflector. What they're giving is what they are capable of recognizing. So the quality of life and the success of that projector in their fulfilling their purpose is entirely dependent and determined by their ability to recognize. Recognition has very much to do with awareness. It's interesting. This is where mechanics meets awareness. I would normally say that the mechanics are at a different level than the awareness, but here you're seeing where they actually meet. And this is also perhaps why right variable consciousness, which is awareness, is part of the new paradigm. So even though a projector has nothing to do with awareness at one level, because we're talking about the surface, the mechanics, compared to beneath the line, beneath the surface, which is the interiority, the subjectivity, and so on. Nevertheless, there is something similar in that they are both needed in this new time, and there are some interesting points to be found here. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about the projector as here to guide, but how do they guide? They can only guide through recognition, and the recognition is what is useful. And so I almost think, even though recognition is a keynote that we give to projectors, it's actually relevant to all of us as nine-centered beings. And this even gets into, I don't want to derail into the no choice discussion, because it can be such a difficult thing, because people can mean so many different things by no choice. But for those who followed my talks on no choice, like at the HDHD conference, I'm of the belief that no choice does not mean predeterminism. It does not mean fatalism. What it means is that you're going to continue to have the exact same looping life experiences until your awareness recognizes something different in that. And the act of recognition itself changes it so you don't have that experience again. And this is why you can present human design to somebody and they may not recognize, they may misrecognize and say they already know it all, or it's nothing new, and they might not recognize anything in it. They may just continue on with their life and nothing changes, or they might recognize in it something that allows them to now recognize all sorts of previously hidden factors that are now named and that are now apparent. And the very act, it's like awareness acts, recognition acts. Once you see something, you can't unsee it. And so the projectors are here to point out what it is we haven't seen, and in pointing it out, to irrevocably break and ruin the ability to stay stuck in our looping cycles that were only out of ignorance and lack of learning, that we had basically that the projector is here to facilitate our learning.
Supports also that they're really here to.
Would you comment that again? Start over.
That idea you just said really supports the idea that projectors are here to guide generators in particular, or energy beings or sacral beings, what you were just talking about.
Yeah. And, manifestors are also energy beings, but in Ra's.
Find sacrals very.
Yeah, exactly.
Because generators, what I really mean is generators can run into a rut. It just seems natural to the generator process where they get stuck with what they invest their energy into. And they have to keep pushing through that stuckness until something changes or whatever. They can't really initiate an end to it.
Yeah, or they try to get out of it and then they get stuck in the exact same thing. I mean, this is a very mystical point where some people take no choice to mean the fatalistic stance that it's almost like, why bother? But there's that great quote from Ra where he says, no choice doesn't mean no chance. Mm-hmm. And what is the chance? What is the chance for? The chance is the chance to learn, the chance to recognize, the chance for awareness. And even though the awareness in some sense is not able to determine the life, You can be very much asleep, but have the fortuitous good luck to be in your correct environment, or maybe you've learned to eat correctly and you to take in things and move through the world correctly, and so on. So it's not necessarily that the awareness is going to solve the problem. I mean, at the same time, the awareness is not even the mind. I mean, if you get into base theory, you discover that the awareness has more to do with the personality, and that the mind is like, how are you using your mind? Yeah. How are you using the mind in such a way that you're using the mind correctly? Using the mind as outer authority, not as decision making. Using the mind the way it's meant to be used, it's designed to be used, so that if you have a mind that is very left variable, you're not expecting that mind to be anything other than left variable, and you're working with patterns and strategies. And if you have a right variable mind, you're not trying to force it into the left variable box. And, we have to kind of decouple ourselves from the mind. It's telling that we are so identified as personalities with the mind that we conflate personality and mind as equivalent terms. So this is really getting at what the projector is here to do. Now, in Ra's example of the single spermatozoa that is the totality, the projectors are at the heads of the hierarchies. They should be anyway. And the generators are kind of under them. And then the manifestors and the reflectors are part of the long tail. And it doesn't mean that they're not valuable and not useful. It's that they're not here to bring about the mutation at this point, that they're here to serve other purposes. I mean, you might say, well, anyone with individual circuitry can bring about mutation. Ra certainly did. Well, yes, but he also, I mean, why was he a manifestor and not a projector then, I guess would be the question, right? Why did he incarnate in that vehicle and not another one? Wouldn't a projector vehicle be more suited? Well, his vehicle was perfectly suited for announcing the end of the old era and announcing the beginning of the new era. And he announced human design to the world. He was a clarion, right? And there's a lot of simpatico with him being a fifth line personality, him being a manifestor, him having a defined ego, him being on the cross of the clarion. Some things work well together. It's a sort of myth of the mind that wants to equalize everything and to imagine that everything has equal advantage and disadvantage. It's not true. There's an advantage to being a fifth line personality and being a manifestor. I know I'm a fifth line generator, and I know the disadvantage of having the generator mechanic, which is better suited for certain lines. In fact, Ra loved doing the four. He didn't at this point consider 5 types with the manifesting generator, but the 4 types and the 12 profiles, and this catalog of 48 combinations of type and profile. So, all right. Any comments so far, Mike? Anything or anything?
No, keep on.
Well, anything from our group? I mean, this is kind of a good pausing place. I can read a little bit from. So, yeah, two more generators have found their way in. So, any comments from anybody on the Zoom? Any remote comments are welcome to jump in, or if not, I can continue with a couple of quotes. There's a lot of chaos in the world, and I think one of the things projectors are here to do is to help organize things in such a way as to eliminate or to get rid of that chaos. I mean, you can almost see chaos as resistance, that anytime you're trying to do something and there's just a homogenized field of something that's not form fitted to it, that there's interference. Yeah, that there's interference, and that what recognition means at one level is not just being recognized for your talents or recognized for what makes you unique and things like that. I mean, that's all lovely, but it can actually mean recognition of the different aspects of the system. It's like, when you hear recognition, think taxonomy, right? That's not what we usually think. Think vocabulary. What vocabulary does Mike use to describe an interpersonal issue someone is facing? And how is that a different vocabulary than what somebody else would use? And how does Mike's way of seeing it tease out certain antagonisms that are invisible from another perspective, and tease out certain weak points that are invisible from another perspective? Now, right variable consciousness also has its own way of doing this. And in talking with Rachel earlier, what we came up with is that the right variable essentially fills up the space by taking in the everything in an indiscriminate way, and then through this holistically drawing in is able to sense the points of least resistance, is able to sense where the blockage is, where the problem is, how to move around that blockage. It actually almost reminds me of what Darmin said about reflectors, which is that reflectors don't make decisions, that there's no decision making for the reflector. A problem arises and then the solution also arises or emerges. So there is a sort of an emergent solution there. But I guess going back to the idea of right variable awareness, we know that the right variable holistically takes in things, not in a discriminating way, not in a selective way. It's meant to just take in the totality of what it's experiencing. But why is it doing this? Well, it can do this to see which way things can flow, to see, well, we're at an impasse. How can the solution emerge from that? And that shows a similarity to the projector who learns the system fully and deeply, so that others are trying to build their way out of the problem, or they're trying to initiate their way out of the problem. But the reflector, or sorry, the projector in this case, I guess a reflector would just be waiting out the problem, just waiting for the solution to they'd be monitoring the problem and sampling and so on. But what the projector is doing is learning the system in such a way that they are able to recognize that what people are saying the problem is not really the problem, and that the questions people are asking are insufficient, and that the problem is not the answer they're getting, but the question they're asking. It's a shift in awareness. It's a paradigm shift. Now, something else I wanted to mention from the talk with Doc earlier, which was really beautiful, was we had just a really great talk, and just seeing, his experience being now post Chiron, being 28 years post Chiron, and he is 78 years old, and his experience of being in human design for so long. And one of the things he was talking about was that core to human design is this notion of waiting, but that waiting is actually torture for the mind, but non-existent for the body, that the body doesn't even understand the concept of waiting. The body is just living. Whether you call it waiting, or whether you call it experiencing, or whether you call it moving, or whether you call it anything, the body is where it is. It has no such, that waiting itself and saying, oh, I have to wait to respond, is actually for the mind. It's to give the mind a name for what it is doing. But in any case, when you kind of see from that perspective that what is needed post 2027, what is needed, we know the projector is needed, and we know that right variable awareness is needed. And what do these have in common? That they are somehow mastering the system for the projector, or permeating the available space to determine how to flow around the problem in the case of the right variable awareness. And these are very different. One is at the level of mechanics, one is at the level of awareness, but they're both needed. And what are they doing? They're really getting in touch with something. It's like the mind is waiting, the mind is on pause, but the life force energy is actually doing something. So the projector who thinks they're waiting for the invitation, well, their mind is waiting. But what is their life force energy doing? It's mastering. It's
Mary Winnegar, The Secret of Waiting.
Please.
Have you listened to Mary Winnegar's The Secret of Waiting? Oh my God.
Would you tell me about it, or?
It's just exactly what you're talking about. Because she wrote her book, what's it called? The Revolution of One. And it talks about, I think she wrote it after 10 years of being in her experiment, and her just very radically learning what it means to wait and try not to initiate and so on. And then she does this audio called The Secret of Waiting. And I listened to it about 2 years ago, during the time where, waiting definitely felt like I couldn't separate the fact that exactly what you're saying. It's like it's really your mind that's waiting, whereas like you continue just living your life. But anyways, it supports what you're talking about, and it's really, really good.
I'm a huge fan of her work.
Yeah.
And I'd love to check that out. Yeah. And and I'm also hoping to get Doc to do more to be a guest and so on. He doesn't live too far from here. He's in Las Cruces, but he could always Zoom in. But yeah, just thinking about what are we faced with as the future is no longer one where we are competing over limited resources. There are limited resources, but that survival is no longer based on building our way out of problems or initiating new Franklin Delano Roosevelt style large scale initiatives, manifestor initiatives. Let's build a great wall or build a great railroad or build any of these things. We can't initiate and build our way out of the problems we're facing collectively. We need to recognize what we've already built and how it might be better utilized.
I was just wondering where like mobilizing the workforce in an unprecedented way for World War II, whether that was, distribution of human labor that was already available in a projectory way, or is that one of these FDR style?
I think it's more manifestor way still, personally. I mean, it's not that we haven't had some inklings in the last couple hundred years of the experimentation of the projector, but I use that as an example of a manifestor because the classic problem is the manifestor says, I need a lot of builders to build our way out of this. But when we lose access to resources, when lithium runs out, when we can't just build our way out of solutions, we have to recognize the systems and the intricacies of those systems, the interdependence of those systems. And on the one hand, we have the projector who is mechanically here to master that. And on the other hand, we have the right variable awareness, which is kind of like AI, kind of like neural networks. There was a really funny point, a guy, kind of an online friend of mine, Scott Aronson, he's a quantum computing guy, and he was saying how difficult it is that we still haven't really figured out how we can take Einsteinian relativity and at the level of the macro reconcile that with the level of the quantum. That the level of the quantum is still and then he was talking to an AI person, and the AI guy was saying, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, we have about 25 arbitrary numbers that we just have to use. And these 25 arbitrary numbers make everything work. And you just know that the value here, you plug in this value, you plug in that value, you plug in that value, it allows you to do all the calculations you need for astrophysics and for quantum physics and all these things. And the guy's like, and that's a problem? And he's like, yeah, because we don't know why we're using these numbers. We don't know why. It's like they're kind of like arbitrary values. And the guy's saying, do you know how many arbitrary values we use in AI? Because in AI, to get it to work, it plugs in hundreds of thousands, even millions or more of these factors that are basically a black box to the people programming the AI. They have no idea what factors it's taking into account because it's determining those arbitrary values and it's determining the mean value between them. And it's doing all of this automagically from our perspective, where we have no visibility into how it gets that answer. And he was like, you guys are worried about 25 factors, try 25 million. That's how right variable awareness works. We have no visibility into it. We're left variable and we're uncomfortable if there's 25 factors we have to arbitrarily use because we want to understand the reason behind it. But right variable is basically permeating something, taking in, absorbing all that information, distilling it to some crystallized essence, and then using that to sort of weave its way around the problems and come up with these solutions. And it's like, where did that solution come from? It just appeared. That solution appeared. The left variable can show its work, So, I mean, these are both things that are needed in the future because we have so many factors to take in. We may not be able, it's kind of like when Ra said, if you really want to study the transits, you would spend a week just analyzing the transits of a single day. Well, that's like the left variable way. Like we can't do that. Life is moving too quickly to be able to take everything into account and to show all of our homework for everything. What we're actually called to do is to engage, if we don't have left variable awareness ourselves, to engage with those who do have who have right variable. We're so left, like you're quad left. I only have one right variable, my node, my design nodes. So, we need to depend on the right variable people in our life to share their awareness with us. And we need to pull their awareness out of them. Now, there's another commonality between right variable and projector. With the projector, we know that their quality of life is determined by the conditioning of the people in their life. How good is the meal they're eating? With the right variable, we know that the quality of their awareness is determined by the people in their life, and they're only as smart as the person pulling from them. So if you're right variable awareness and you're beating yourself up over not knowing something and not achieving more and so on, it's the people that well, first of all, you're not here to achieve in that sense. Your achievement is something different. Your achievement is a unique distillation of your experience. But also, the people drawing from you are not necessarily able to draw from you to your fullest potential. So if you're not meeting your potential and not fulfilling your purpose, then a big part of that is the people in your life. So there's a commonality there. Now, of course, it's important for everyone. I mean, manifestors need their peace, and they're not going to have it with people disrupting their peace all the time. And I mean, reflectors are not, we say Teflon aura, they're not immune to the auras of other people. They absolutely absorb the auras of other people. So, I mean, in their own way. But I guess I'm just saying that there are certain commonalities here that point to a major shift in how we approach the problems of the world, from let's build and initiate our way out of it and use strategies, to let's look to the experts, to the projectors who've actually developed their expertise in these systems. And their expertise is a way of reframing those systems, developing their own vocabulary for those systems, changing the questions we even ask, so that the old questions are not necessarily answered. They just become moot because a newer question comes along that is a better approach, and will actually help us solve the real problems we have in this world. Yeah, I'm going to find a couple quotes. If anyone has any comments, and anyone online is more than welcome to jump in as well. I'm going to just find, I have to find it here actually. So any comments so far? I mean, I know it's a fifth line day. Nobody wants to.
Like on this basic level, isn't the commonality between right variable and projector the whole nine-centered thing, that they're both nine-centered concepts? Or
Yeah, that they both emerged in 1781.
Yeah.
That everyone was quad left before 1781, unless we go way back to the Neanderthal, which was quad right, but in a way that we don't understand because it didn't have the solar plexus. So it was like the rightmost variable of the spleen or something like that. So it doesn't really apply. So you're absolutely right. In 1781 is when rightness emerged and when the projector emerged. And if we look at the whole of history as we know it before 1781, the whole of recorded history, back to the time of prehistory, it was quad left and there were no projectors. Yeah. All right. So I have a couple of quotes here. I'm just going to read. I'm going to find them here. All right, this was from Doc. And this is Ra Uruhu, of course. This is Doc's, sent me this quote he liked from Ra. The only thing that is going to be able to organize humanity as it moves forward is projectors and their innate capacity to give guidance. You become the substitute. He means you, the projector. You become the substitute of what the background frequency was. That background frequency that provided everybody with a way of operating together. Once that's gone, it becomes the role of the projector. That the projector is actually substituting for the cross of planning background frequency. That what held us together and helped organize us and helped orchestrate all of these things was the background frequency. So to answer your question, those FDR style New Deal coming together in World War II and so on, that was held together by the cross of planning. And that's gone, and now it's your job. You're replacing the cross of planning. It's it's the first time a type has replaced a global cycle theme. I see there's a couple comments or questions. Christine, wouldn't tone 5 and 6 cognition folks also be needed post 2027? Feeling and touch in the solar plexus binary. Well, yes, tone 5 and 6 are right variable. Now, tone 4 is also right variable, but it shares its binary with the left variable. And something I've liked to do is a thought experiment. So first of all, are we all pretty familiar with tone here? Are you familiar with tone yet? Have we got into any of that? Okay, so maybe we'll just talk a little bit about, would you describe tone for a moment while I look for the next quote?
What tone is?
Yeah.
So tone, it's a subsection of color. So color being a subsection of line. So it's precise to like the half hour when you were born. And it is the part of, it's where the when the neutrinos enter our crystals and start to organize our matter, the middle of the crystal is where tone resounds. And so it kind of lays the architecture, whether you're looking at the design side, it sort of sets the architecture or the template for your body, and on the personality side for your psyche. And so it's the most linked to awareness. And then there's these three binaries of tone. Tones 1 and 2 are splenic, related to the spleen center. Tones 3 and 4 are related to the ajna, and 5 and 6 are related to the solar plexus.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a fairly advanced aspect of human design, and one that wasn't developed until many years into human design. I mean, one thing is, if you started learning human design as it was developed from Ra, you would have gotten the centers, the body graph, the channels, long before there was even type. And then you get type, strategy, and authority. And much later, you go beneath the line into color and tone. And but essentially, when you get to the level of tone, what we are talking about is an aspect of awareness and our cognition, our cognitive architecture. On the design side, we call it cognition. On the personality side, we call it sense. But yeah, you're basically, you are getting to how your brain works, how your mind works. You're getting to these really fundamental levels where on the physical side, it's related to the senses. So you have tones like smell and taste and so on. And then on the personality side, it is the equivalent of that on the personality. And let's turn off any sounds that we have, please. Yeah. So, but it's going to be like on the personality side, for instance, are you really attuned to survival? That's going to be more of left variable, because see, the tones, there are 6 tones, and the first 3 are left, the last 3 are right. And so this almost equates to, in the common parlance, what we call left brain, right brain. Are you strategic? Are you linear? Or are you more nonlinear and more, but it doesn't, we can only take that simile so far, because Mike is quad left, but incredibly imaginative. And, in a test of right brain would probably score off the charts in right brain, because you have so much imagination and so on. So we have to actually go deeper than the superficial understanding of what leftness and rightness are, to understand actually that the left is here to pattern match, that it's here to discriminate and discern in how it takes in information. It's here to do homework and to study and so on. And that the right learns through osmosis, that if you show the right variable, if you give them one great practical bit of advice that Rachel always gives, and she's a 5-1, so she knows practicality, and she's quad right, Rachel Palella, and she'll say, give me broad strokes. That's what the right variable needs. It needs broad strokes. Give it to me in broad strokes, because they will watch and they will learn through osmosis and through the experiential, not necessarily the way that the left variable learns, which is through not necessarily rote memorization, but at the very least a sort of analysis that lends itself to being organized and categorized and divided and gone over. You could even think of it that the left variable has excellent access to its working memory, which can make it look so smart, because they can just immediately have instantaneous information retrieval. And so this instantaneous information retrieval comes across as intelligence. And the right variable can get into all sorts of problems and be held back grades in school, and can have learning disabilities, so-called, and so on. But what they're actually doing is taking in information in a very deep way that they do not have access to. They cannot immediately retrieve that information through an act of intention. It rather must be pulled out of them by somebody else. And then they are just as surprised as the other person is what they had inside of them that they didn't know they had. And if anyone has comments on right or left variable, or wishes to describe it in their own way, I mean, it's a very rich topic, a very deep topic.
curious, like, since I'm also quad right projector, I'm curious for Rachel if she feels like she has to be recognized first before someone can really pull on her to the best of their ability or the best that could come out of her. Because for me, it definitely feels like there needs to be recognition first. I'm just kind of realizing that in the moment, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a way of tying together the awareness and the mechanics, where being a quad right projector, there's the element of recognition. There may also be recognition just as a general, simply because, as a generic, we are nine-centered, and recognition is such a part of what it is to be nine-centered. I mean, regardless of type.
When your channels, if they're projected.
Yeah, well, but even somebody like me who has no projected channels, I don't mean at a mechanical level. I just mean to understand recognition decoupled from being the exclusive realm. Like for you, it is your life force energy. So you literally become healthier and more alive and more vibrant and act so much full of life. I mean, when we say life force energy for the channels, you can really see it when a projector is being recognized. They're being nourished and they're coming to life. And that is a mechanic for you that someone who doesn't have projected channels isn't going to have. But for Rachel, just from knowing her, I mean, it seems to me that that her awareness is there for whoever's there, and that awareness isn't even really a decision. It's just the decision is what gets you where you are, right? The decision, do you want to come on this trip? Okay. Well, or she has clarity. She's an emotional manifesting generator. She comes to clarity and she goes on the trip. Well, then her awareness is just available. And it seems to me that, and it seems to me that all awareness is ultimately dependent on something external to that awareness, whether it's left or right, that it doesn't really exist until somebody else bumps into it or something else bumps into it. We can get in these mind prisons where we're sort of in a hall of mirrors, creating our own awareness through this, refraction that occurs. But generally speaking, our awareness is not really a decision. Like, I'm not making a decision to share my awareness. You just happen to be here. My decision was to come here. And so I think that is true regardless of type, that there's, but like you're saying, if you came here incorrectly, then the people here are not going to be pulling things out of you that are valuable to you or them. And similarly, if somebody else ends up in the wrong place, right, then they're not going to necessarily be able to maximize the potential of that awareness. Now, here's a quote from Ra. This is from Projector Empowerment. He's talking to projectors. This is what you're here for. You're not here for the physical transformation of the planet. You're here for the intellectual transformation of the planet. So the greatest responsibility that projectors have is to study, whatever that thing is. And Ra says, when he says study, it could just be doing it, especially for right variable, right? They're learning about it as they're doing it. And it can be about really being absorbed, being totally focused on something. So you get to the depth of that because that's the thing that is going to pave your way in this life. You get to the depth of what the thing actually is. That allows you to intellectually transform. You can't change how people talk about things and change how people think about things and change how people see things unless you've learned deeply what that thing is. Very similar to your point, Mike, for saying that the projector's use of attention is what clarifies things, that you're getting clarity through the use of attention. In a different sense than the emotional clarity, but perhaps also one of the things that we need in this future world we enter.
Well, the witness gets clarity about it too, but in a way it becomes more clear in the Maya also. You clarify it in the Maya, not just your perception of it.
It's not just that your mind is clarified, it's that you help disentangle it from other things in the actual world so that it can stand more on its own. It kind of,
Right. Which again gets into the backwards and history facing nature of rightness and abstract experiential circuitry and stuff too.
Yeah, this last point from Mike is something unusual, which is that the future is solar plexus awareness. Okay, yeah, I said this, but it is also something that it is an unusual thing that's just happening in the world, which is that the time we're coming from was the splenic time, and the left variable is more associated to the spleen. And so coming from the splenic era, we know that the spleen makes predictions, and that part of that logic is being future oriented, predicting the future, looking for the pattern and saying we need to ration our food or we won't survive through the winter and things like that. And so the past was very future oriented. And I guess it kind of makes sense if we think of the trajectory of all of humanity and our place in history in this development of consciousness as a breath. I call it the second great meridian of time, right? The first meridian being 0 AD or 0 CE, and the second meridian being peak population, after which the prana out breath diminishes the world population. And as we are moving from the left to the right, moving from a future-oriented past to a past-oriented future. And there's a symmetry there, and it makes sense. When you're getting towards the end of time, there's not much to look forward to. You have to look back. And even when we think of the role of the projector as not building their way out of problems, but looking back to what's already been built and can be used in a different way. Even in the literal sense of just not having the resources to keep building new things. So Ra continues, you're here for the intellectual transformation of the planet, to study and to get to the depth, because that's what's going to pave your way in this life. It's an intellectual responsibility. It's an awareness responsibility of projectors. So it's various processes where you go from ignorance to accomplishment. For a projector, ignorance is the most dangerous thing in your life. What you cannot grasp intellectually can always threaten you, because your life is determined by your intellectual capabilities. It's determined by your capacity to recognize. It is determined by your depth. You're not providing the other with manifesting or generating. What you're providing them with is an intellectual skill set, a recognition skill set that you can trade for those resources that they have. That's the deal. The deal is you have something that is consciousness oriented that you're here to contribute on this plane. That's why you're in trouble the moment you're into the form stuff, the moment you're into your own life and its problems without seeing what your real potential is. And that's Ra Uruhu from Projector Empowerment. So I think at this point, I'd just like to open it up to any discussion, any comments. All right, a comment or question from Johnny, a 2-5 triple split generator with manifesting potential.
I want to go back to, you're talking about the going from splenic to solar plexus. So splenic being this past, future-oriented past, and we're going to a past-oriented future. But in that transition, we pass through the ajna, don't we? So where does the ajna lie, and what role does that play?
Thank you, Johnny. That's a great question. And if anyone else has comments on that, I have my own answer. Do you have a comment on that? No, you look like you might.
I mean, just the first thing that comes to mind is, like pre-1781, us navigating life through our minds and how so our whole relationship to our mind is completely shifting. I think even in terms of personally for me through human design, it's like deconditioning my ajna, and I have inner vision cognition from just like, there used to be a time where I was really selective about what I took in. And now it feels like I can let it all kind of just filter through. And it's interesting, but it doesn't like change the quality of my life the way that like waiting and living life from my body does, So I think it's just about like changing our whole relationship to our minds, basically, and how we see it.
Mm-hmm. And you have an undefined head and ajna, and so maybe the detachment from, oh, I'm going to know something that's going to solve my problem, and realizing that nothing you ever know will ever solve something, that it's really the mastery of the awareness and how you use that and so on. Well, and I have kind of a point that I get to when you're talking about the ajna, which is that when you look at the left variable tones, so we were talking about the tones, and the tones 1, 2, and 3 are all left variable. But tones 1 and 2 are from the spleen. They're survival tones. So they're all about surviving at any cost, competing for limited resources, damned what anybody thinks of it. They don't care about if it feels good. They don't care about if it's going to get them admiration or respect or anything. It's simply in the moment survival, competition, must succeed for limited resources. Then you get to the third tone, and the third tone is still left variable. But it's kind of outnumbered 2-1 in the left variable, right? Which is funny. It's also outnumbered 2-1 in the right variable when you get to the fourth tone. So it's always outnumbered. Even that has an interesting point, right? That the ajna is always kind of outnumbered and not really at home where it is in its variable. But when we look at the left variable, we know that before 1781, it was all left variable. And so can't we see the history up until 1781 as the development of the mind, the development of the ajna from the spleen, and how early society was all splenic? In fact, when you read Freud, Totem and Taboo, or Fraser's Golden Bow, these great classics of cultural anthropology, you find that early societies did not yet have law, and that the first law, what really, I guess we could even say what created the society, maybe there were pre-societies, nomadic peoples and so on, that did not have the incest prohibition. So what would happen would be the postulated father would kill his male sons and would raise his daughters to then marry his daughters and impregnate them to have more daughters/granddaughters and so on. And that this was a really terrible and terrifying part of human history that was ultimately the output of a survival-oriented mind that didn't want to be usurped by their own sons, right? So that the establishment of law, we could almost see as the establishment of respect and ajna and tradition and culture and all of these things, with the incest prohibition as a very fundamental move in the development of human consciousness that was the banding together of the brothers to overthrow and come together and fight against the father and ultimately kill the father. And through that, sharing in the guilt of killing the father, but through that guilt, vowing themselves to never commit the sin that the father committed and creating the first law. And so we have this rich, deep psychoanalytic truth that really only emerged in modern consciousness in the early 1900s with the discovery of Pluto, 1930, and the work of Freud and Jung and others. This kind of shameful truth of where we emerged from. But you can see it play out at so many levels where there were some cultures that were splenic and some cultures that were ajna, and the spleen cultures only cared about survival. So they would raid and they would kidnap and murder, and they had no respect for other cultures. And then you could see the banding together, even here in New Mexico, the banding together of the Pueblo Indians, where the Pueblo Indians are actually many different cultures, 28 different cultures that banded together to fight against the homogenizing attacks, mostly from Yaqui and other more kind of, the differentiation occurred in the ajna, in other words, and the splenic was more homogenized at that time. And all it cared about was getting limited resources. So it took the ajna people to band together in an agreement that respected their differences and allowed them to have differences, but set their differences aside to band together and protect themselves against the splenic invaders. I mean, there's a lot of history that is the battle. You could go back to the Battle of Thermopylae and of the homogenizing force of 20,000 Persians who had no respect for the cultural developments of what was at that point the beginning of ancient Greece and philosophy and all of that, and the battle of the 300 Spartans and 2,000 other odd Greeks who defended against the invading 20,000. So you can really see the story play out again and again and again, where it was a triumph in the development of human consciousness to actually get to the point where the mind is a problem. The mind's a problem now, but it's only a problem because the first problem was, how do we even develop this mind? This mind that doesn't give in to habitual reaction, this mind that is able to obey a law that prohibits incest, that prohibits murder, that prohibits all of these things that the splenic being simply was not able to suspend their habitual survival instinct in obeying, right? So yes, the mind became this terrible tyrant, but it's only after it saved us from ourselves, from our own competitive nature, our own murderous instinct. Thank you. Clap for the mind. A sad tear for the mind. All right. Nathan Garrison said, we used to defer our problem solving to institutions. How is that problem solving different from what you're talking about? Well, okay, yeah. I mean, the projector is the new institution. The projector replaces the institution, and the individual projector understands the system in the way that the institution was essentially the system. I mean, I guess it's an interesting question of like, I think projectors now are able to master the systems of institutions, but that those institutions are going to be falling apart from the loss of the cross of planning, which is a frequency that sort of glues everything together and makes us work together, even if we don't really want to work together. So that institutions of the future, if they're going to succeed or even be institutions, I mean, it can go two ways. Either there are less institutions, or the ones that are around are radically transformed and they succeed because a projector figured out how to make them succeed. But right now, you take a 4323 projector and the cross of explanation, and they go into a school and they say, all right, thank you so much for hiring me. And and thanks for giving me all this recognition and power. And I've made a list of all the things to change. And wait a minute. Change? We've been doing it this way for 100 years. We're not going to change. No. We hired you to stop the people complaining. Well, yeah, but they're complaining because it's really inefficient and doesn't work and it needs to change. No. We don't use the CH word around here. That word isn't, we don't use that word. And that's what projectors are up against, is the institutional inertia and institutional narcissism, the organizational narcissism that has led these organizations to basically be semi-dead, semi-living zombie shells of what they formerly were. I mean, we're at the very end of the cross of planning. There's not a lot of energy left. There's just these sort of cash cows that are still being milked dry. Yeah.
The quad rights also replace institutions because they become the archives, the stored knowledge.
Good point. That the right variable that takes in so deeply even has the potential to retain the knowledge and fulfill the role of what the internet used to be. That with information retrieval, the left variable can look up any, put in any search term and get the information back. But what happens when the power goes out? What happens when there's no internet? We need right variable people that the left variable can perform their information retrieval with. And it sounds funny now to think of it that way, but that certain people's role is to replace the internet in some sense. It sounds far-fetched, but we don't know. I mean, land-based lithium runs out in 2027. We will lose access to it in 2025 through embargoes and other political problems. I mean, it's already quintupled in price in the last decade. And then we already are doing water-based lithium extraction from the oceans, which, supposedly only filters and only takes non-essential minerals from the ocean. But our track record for knowing what's essential and what isn't the best, right? So, I mean, where could it go wrong? We're just going to start large-scale lithium extraction from the oceans in the next couple of years, right? Which also causes a lot of environmental damage. So, okay, well, any other comments, questions? I know that this is quite a far-reaching, I guess it's a fifth line day. We had to look at the big picture, had to get a little.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, question from Bud.
Design people.
I'll repeat the question. His question, are there any human design people in politics? Are there any mayors, kings, queens?
Obama was an emotional projector.
Obama was a projector. I don't think he was a. Well, I know. Yeah, I thought he only. Oh, okay.
4130.
Yeah, he was a 4130. Thank you, Lucita. Yeah. So the question is, are there? No, there are not people that are aware of human design politics. Why? It's still. Vaughn says to change it, you have to get into politics. That remains to be seen. I mean, I think this is change that occurs one person at a time, and I think that the change is of. Vaughn says right now we're holding secret meetings. That's what we're doing. We're holding secret meetings in a dive. He says. Well, I don't know. I don't know how secret it is, but. Yeah, I guess it is a little secret. We have the lights on. I mean, it's not. It's a fifth line day. We're in secrecy.
In politics, I'd say, as someone who worked in the political sphere, I'd say it's not built for projectors. It takes a tremendous amount of energy and a huge amount of burnout comes out of it. I was so passionate about it when I entered it. And by the end of it, I'd had like 5 UTIs where only blood was exiting my bladder. And that was my first experience of burnout. So in order for projectors, I think, to enter the political sphere, that entire makeup of like, you need to completely devote 100 and gazillion% of yourself and die trying needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Vaughn says maybe it's up to generators. Yeah, well, I mean, maybe a lot of. I mean, the way I see it, the way I see it is that there are changes that occur at all different levels, and so the change at a cultural level from a single piece of art or a single poem can be greater than 1,000 people working hard to change something. I mean, there's so much work that is moot. There's so much work trying to save parts of the environment that can never be saved, or there's work done, right? There's a lot of, I mean, this is the real paradigm shift of realizing that what we are starved of is not workers to do the work. We're starved of ideas, and we're starved of. Vaughn says he's going to put his dirty dishes in the sink and let somebody else wash them. That's what I'm saying. No, I don't. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the person who invented the dishwasher, well, they may have actually done more harm than good. We don't know, but maybe, who knows? I mean, there's to invent something that renders the old way obsolete. I'm not a techno utopian. I mean, it can also just be understanding. Yeah, it could also just be understanding we might not need a lot of dishes. We might just each have our own dish. I mean, if you go to. Yeah. So, but Vaughn says it's fun to have a few drinks in a secret meeting. Well, I don't disagree with that, but.
Vaughn seems to be saying something. How he thinks human design could change politics.
No, what he's saying is that if we want to change something, go out there and do it. But what I'm saying is, no, I don't see it that way at all. What I see it as is there's a very conventional idea. It's very similar to what Oscar Wilde said about it's easy to have sympathy for suffering. It's very hard to have sympathy for ideas. And the world has more than enough sympathy for suffering, but nobody has sympathy for ideas. And so what I would say is it's easy to say that the problem is that people are lazy and not working hard enough. This is the paradigm that says the generators have to build our way out of it. And if we all come together and build, we'll make it. But it's harder to admit that people are building things. They're just building the wrong things. And that what we need is someone who understands more deeply what actually needs to be built, rather than just trying to build our way out of a hole, right? So, yeah, I see. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll come to you in just a moment, Nicola. But yeah,
what we need is a projector to get behind Jacques Fresco's socioeconomic plan, making a utopic society, which can also incorporate AI at the same time. As part of it was having, computer/TV in every home, and you have access to all of the information in the world, and there's no like bars on information anymore. It's a total revolutionary concept. So
Yeah, well, and the thing is, since 1961, we haven't had any prevention. I mean, all the veils have been lifted, all the information is available, but what we're face to face with is the problem that people still like to say that there's information that's not available. It's not true. More information isn't going to save us. People, we don't know how to do it. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's one person at a time. Like if I help you have a better life, there's a ripple effect where then you help everyone else in your life have a better life, not even necessarily through them even knowing you're into human design or anything about that, but you simply have a different bedside manner with the people that you meet, and that ripples. And so it's an intractable problem to try to solve it en masse. How do you make peace in the Middle East? You can't solve it en masse. You solve it one person at a time. So how do you reach the individual? And then we do have a comment / question in just a moment.
I was just going to share from a structural standpoint that if a material channel, that is to say a tribal, if tribal circuitry wants to move through solar plexus, move through rightness, then it has to go and reach the throat, then it has to take the mystic way. Because if tribal material is moving into solar plexus, into rightness, it has to take the 1949, 3740, and then it would normally terminate at the heart. But the only way for it to reach the throat would be to become individual and then integration. And that final integration channel is kind of the each one teach one channel. It's your behavior in the moment. It's that exemplifying yourself through your conduct, whatever, that's the only way for the material potential of the solar plexus to be realized, to be concretized.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That yeah. So okay, well, I do have some comments on that. I mean, also that's changing because the 1949 is breaking, so I guess it's making it difficult. I mean, what Mike is talking about is that the mystical way, which is kind of a sub-circuit, or it's kind of a stream. It's not really a stream, but it's the mystical way is a set of gates that
The secret circuit.
yeah, it's that move up from the root and end up in the throat. And I guess what you're saying is that it moves from the tribal, leaving behind the tribal and the ego when it goes into 5125 individual, and then to 1020. And that there is this kind of some deconstructive work we can do there to understand what is the tribe's relationship to the solar plexus, as opposed to on the splenic side, and how that does ultimately end up in having to live in the moment as yourself, as an exemplar of yourself through the 1020. Nicola, I know that we've kind of moved far afield, but if you have comments, questions, anything, and
Thanks. Yes, so I'm a 4/6 splenic projector with the channel of surrender. And I just have more of a comment, just something to throw into the mix, not a question per se, but for some context, I started off working ridiculous hours for the first 30 odd years of my life, similar to what the other woman was saying around burnout and, politics and stuff. And eventually found work that was a little more aligned before even finding human design. And now I find myself in a position, so I'm 3 parts right as well. I'm an active environment, and I have need, motivation, power view as well, which is interesting to just observe the chimera of what that means for myself. But my work now is basically to sit in on sort of management level government interviews here in Australia. So I get to be this fly on the wall of what's happening within government, which is a really interesting sort of perspective. I didn't go seeking out this job, it sort of found me. And there's challenges. It's interesting to hear you talk about right variables, because I definitely take in the whole interview, like the essence of it, the frequency, what wasn't said, what they said, and how I need to reword it, and all these things. But there's challenges as well, because it forces me to sit down and sit still. I only have channel or the gate 9 in that full channel, so there's challenges there for me. But and sort of transitioning now, just as some context of what I'm seeing and where I'm focusing a lot of my attention and my energy right now. My perspective on waiting in my experiment is I've reflected just in the last week or so about this, and I was like, okay, I'm not afraid of death, but this idea of not fully living makes me feel very anxious. And I was like, what's, why is that? And it was like this mind anxiety. And I sort of came to feel like we're all just these, like the story, like I'm going to miss out on things, and this mind anxiety that comes in. But when I was able to realize that the story that I'm afraid of missing out on ends when I die, and that's, more or less because it's my story, how I see and experience life, I was able to settle more into the waiting that is talked about in human design, and that is so important for me as a projector, which I've really struggled with through the mind. And so now it's a really it feels empowering to wait now that I'm not afraid of missing out on things in life. I suppose I was able to sort of reconcile that. So that's just some of my recent reflections on waiting. These have been things that have come in really recently for me. And I'm just excited to see where it takes me, because all of the most interesting things that have happened to me in my life have sort of come into my world of nothing. It's been nothing that I've manifested and made happen, of course. So yeah, that's all I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I was thinking of something that Lacan, the great French psychoanalyst, said, which is that people come to him and that one of the great fears is the death of the parents. Their own death as well, the individual's death, but the death of the parents is a big one, of what will happen when my parents die. And he said that actually the fear was not a fear of death, it was a fear of life, because they were actually already dead. They were living out the life of a puppet, fully performing for the gaze of the other, and that as long as the other watches them, they had a fixed sense of who they are. And the real fear is, who will I be when the one who's watching me dies? Because then I'll no longer have someone to perform for. So maybe
and that is so, yeah. And actually, you just triggered what made me feel, what all brought on this existential thought that I was having, which was my father being divorced at the age of 76 and going into dementia, and me being so far away from him. He's in Canada, right? Like sort of two big things that are just like, holy shit, that's a lot to kind of process and think about. And that death is something that I'm really fascinated by. I think it's something in Western society we don't really think about all that much. And it's sort of what you've been skirting around with everything you've been saying without actually using that word today as well. Yeah.
We also have Mars and gate 28 right now, the 28-6, at least yesterday, which is, so her talking about the fear of not living is quite literally what we're being programmed with right now, I think, which is interesting.
Yeah, good point. And that's your only channel, is the 2838. I also have 28, but yeah, that part of 28 is the fear of not having fulfilled your purpose, or the fear of life being meaningless, or life having been wasted, or things like that.
Interesting.
And Mike also has 2838. Well, any final comments, questions? Anybody want to jump in? Otherwise, I know we've gotten quite philosophical today. I know you're thinking a lot, Johnny. Any last comments, replies to anything?
Not in the moment. My sacral says, give me a minute.
He's a 2-5, so also kind of shy. Well, I'm happy to call it, unless anybody has any more comments, any ideas. But yeah, it's just some very far-reaching philosophical speculation today. I like to get to what can we say about what is going on in the big picture and our place in it. And that is kind of a fifth line thing, where what the fifth line is doing, it really is experiential. And it's saying, how do we relate our experience to something bigger than just our experience? That the fifth line isn't here to simply have an experience and say, wow, I had this experience. They're here to say, I had this experience and you should experience this too. So I saw this 1,000-yard view, or this, this bird's eye view of things, and I want others to see that too, because it can put things in a different perspective. Or I saw this way of approaching projectors that might be useful for others. And so it is kind of a fifth line activity to sort of take from our experience and see if we can turn that into something that is generally useful. And it doesn't always work, right? It's not easy to take a personal experience and to make it useful for others. Question?
Right now, the only way a generator can reach a projector is to pay him.
Vaughn says right now, the only way, it's not true, but the only way that a generator can reach a projector is to pay them. I assume you mean to hire them for a human design reading.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true, because you have a projector right here who is barely out of arm's length, and
Just give them recognition.
No, not for a reading.
yeah.
I mean, a generator, the very word, it's a motivator.
Well,
Get the projectors off their butts and off the planet.
the generator is not here to
think
get the
so.
projectors off their butts. Vaughn said the generator's role is to motivate the projector to get them off their butts so they actually do something. That is absolutely not what the generator is here to do. The generator is here to build. I mean, you build all day long. I build all day long.
Projectors, dishes.
Okay. Yeah, that is probably, I think this has more to do with a personal vendetta than anything else. Vaughn said he's going to keep washing projectors' dishes because apparently they don't wash their own dishes. Okay. We've gotten to the bottom of it. We have solved the mystery. Vaughn knows a projector who does not wash their own dishes, apparently. Okay, he's speaking in metaphor, he says. All right. Well, on that note, till next time, thank you all for joining. And yeah, it's been wonderful chatting, and I will see you all next week, if not sooner. So take care.
Out of the gate of